Last time, folks, we were talking about abolitionist authors. We talked about Theodore Dwight Wells' American Slavery as It Is. I gave you an idea of what slavery was like. We talked about how slaves with their wounds open had like pepper and salt run into their wounds. We talked about how slaves were mistreated. And we talked about how some slaves were almost beaten to death. Yes?
That May 18th, right? That's on the Sunday.
And it's the Friday, May 17th.
That's on Saturday.
The 16th. The 16th is a Friday.
The 16th is a Friday, and the
I think
19th
it's
is
on
a
a
Monday.
Monday.
It's the 16th?
Yes.
Maybe the 16th. Oh, that's wrong.
I had my...
Yeah, it'll be the 16th. We talked about Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And that was important because it convinced many Americans to be what? Abolitionists. It also convinced England and France not to do what? Join the South during the Civil War. We also talked about the impending crisis of the South, which showed that who was most affected by the slavery system? Poor white Southerners. This is Mr. King. Hi. I'm going to record for... I do... Sorry about that. So there was the impending crisis of the South, which showed that the South, poor white Southern farmers were most affected by slavery because slavery prevented poor white Southerners from having what? Jobs. It was taking away jobs from them. And the fact that the South did not industrialize also took away that potential for jobs. There was Northern opposition to abolition as well. So let's talk about Northern opposition to abolition. So Northern opposition to abolition. So while many Northerners did want to end slavery, there were many Northerners that did oppose the abolition of slavery. And pretty much what you have happening in this cartoon is that the devil is saying what? Slavery is a national sin. So the argument being made by many was that the devil was encouraging abolition. That what the devil was trying to do was to divide the country. And so the devil was putting in the minds of these Northerners that slavery was bad. But the Southerners said, no, slavery is a good thing, and the devil is trying to trick you, North. So there was this belief that the devil was trying to divide the country. Well, the Northern opposition to slavery or abolition looked like this. The first argument against abolition was slavery was legal, so stop complaining. The first argument is slavery is legal, so stop complaining. We went through this several times already. Look, we've talked about slavery. It's legal. It's in the Constitution. Stop complaining about it. That was their first argument. Second argument. Cotton is king. Do we need slaves? Do we need slavery in the North? Yes, we do. We need it for the cotton. So guess what? Cotton is king. Stop trying to take away our, way of life. You need our cotton. Third argument. Southern plantations owed Northern banks millions. Southern plantations owed Northern banks millions. Southern plantations owed Northern banks millions. Why? What did they borrow money for? Slaves, land, supplies, whatever else. And so why are Northern banks worried about the abolition of slavery? They'll never get repaid. So they said, we can't free the slaves now. Those people owe us money. And if we get rid of slavery, will they ever be able to pay us back? No, so we don't want to get rid of slavery either. So those are the major arguments against abolition. Those are the major arguments against abolition. Let's now talk about sectionalism. So let's talk about sectionalism and sectional struggles. Sectionalism and sectional struggles. So folks, sectionalism and sectional struggles are pretty much the same thing. The idea is that different sections of the country were having conflict. So the question is, who is having a conflict? The North and the South. So we're going to be talking about this conflict between the North and the South again and again and again. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about a series of events, and what you have to ask yourself is, did we increase or decrease sectional struggles? Did we increase or decrease sectional tensions? So as we go from event to event to event, we're going to ask ourselves, did things get better or worse? Did things get harder or better? So we're going to talk about sectional struggles. And again, specifically, what two sections are going to be struggling? The North and the South. Everyone ready here? Okay. So the first thing you have to understand about this sectional struggle comes all the way down to politics. And really, the politics of slavery in Congress and statehood. So, first off, folks, to pass a law in Congress, a bill has to go to both the House and then the Senate. Okay? Can a bill become a law if it only passes the House? Can it become a law if it only passes the Senate? No. And so in order for a bill to become a law, it has to pass both the House and the Senate. So, in the House of Representatives, representation is based on what, according to the Constitution? No. Population. It's based on population. The bigger your population, the more votes your state has, right? It's a representative body. So, the North or the South? Who has more people in their state that can vote? The North or the South? The North clearly dominates the House of Representatives, right? The North clearly dominates the House of Representatives because do they have more people than the South?
Yes.
Most definitely. What about the Senate, though? The Senate, how many votes do we get in the Senate? 2 per. 2 per state. It's equal. So, hypothetically, can either the North or South dominate the Senate? No, because it's equal. And in fact, at this time, there were about an equal number of southern states and northern states. But if you're going to pass a bill, let's say there was 13 southern states and 13 northern states, and let's say that bill was to abolish slavery. Is that bill to abolish slavery, is that bill going to pass the House? A bill to abolish slavery, is it going to pass the House? Why is it going to pass the House? Because they're mostly Northerners voting in the House. But is it going to pass the Senate with an even amount? It's not. Now, what if the North all of a sudden added one more state? Is the abolition of slavery now going to pass the Senate? And does that mean it's going to become a law? Yes, and so what it comes down to is, if the North has more votes than the South, then they're going to win and abolish slavery. But if the South continues to maintain a balance, will the North ever be able to abolish slavery? So what it ultimately comes down to, folks, is this sectional balance in the Senate. It all comes down to a sectional balance in the Senate. And every time we add more states, is that going to upset the balance in the Senate? And so if we add a slave state, who's not going to be happy? The North. And if I add a free state, who's not going to be happy? The South. And so as we expand further and further west, this debate over the Senate is going to be a serious problem. Questions there? Let me show you a video. Just so we all law, we're going to watch a quick video with how a bill. All right, so we're going to talk about expansion now. Yes?
Why is it that buses have to stop at the railroad?
Because if they don't hear a train coming. Because sometimes railroad crossings don't work, and not all railroad crossings have railroad signs. So if you're especially in a rural area, you don't have signs. You just have to listen for the train. If you're not paying attention, you just pass right through it. T-bone. And it happened several times, which is why we passed those laws. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about the Louisiana Purchase. And because of the Louisiana Purchase, folks, why might this create more conflict in America now? Because we have all this territory, what are we going to eventually do with all this territory? Huh? And we're going to distribute them and turn them into what? Slave or free states. And is that going to create tension in America? Definitely. So when we got the Louisiana Purchase, folks, we got a lot of territory. And specifically what we got was 9 new states. And by 1819, 9 new states entered the Union. Vermont, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Louisiana, Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, and Alabama. That put us at a total of how many states, folks? We only had 9 states in America? We added 9 states, which means how many states did we have? How many states did we start with? Okay, so how many states did we have by 1819? 22. We had 22 states in America. There were 11 slave and 11 free. Okay? So, as we were adding new states, were we trying to maintain that sectional balance in America? So, free slave, free slave, free slave. And in 1819, we already had 9 states in America. Okay? And we had 22 states total, 11 free, and 11 slave. In that way, were we still maintaining that sectional balance in the Senate? Yeah, it was equal so far. Good? Well, this changed in 1819 when Missouri decided to become a state. Missouri applies for statehood. Now, the problem with Missouri applying for statehood is, what is Missouri going to end up doing? Missouri wants to become a slave state, by the way. So Missouri applies for statehood as a slave state. Who's not happy about that? The North, because what is that going to do? It's going to make it uneven and upset that balance in the Senate. So Missouri applies for statehood. The North is upset about it. And so tensions increase. In order to reduce those tensions, though, we decide to pass a new law called the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And in the Missouri Compromise of 1820, here's what the law says. Number 1, Missouri will become a slave state. We'll give the Southerners that. But if Missouri is going to become a slave state, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new state called Maine, and that's going to become a free state. By the way, Maine up here, folks, that was originally part of Massachusetts. And then Massachusetts gave up Maine to make it a new state. Does that make sense to everyone? So before, Maine was just part of Massachusetts, but Massachusetts gave it up to make it a brand new state. And by doing this, what did they do? They kept that balance. They maintained that balance. But the third part about the Missouri Compromise that's really important is that they also established the 3630 boundary, or the 3630 line. And what they said about the 3630 line was at this line right here, they said slavery was not allowed above the 3630 line. They said slavery was not allowed above the 3630 line. But the South was okay with that, actually. They said that's fine. Because what's the problem with the North? Why don't they care about expanding plantations in the North? Yeah, the soil's just not that good for farming. So they say, whatever, we'll keep slaves in the South. But they said this is great. Now have we evenly split up the country? The North gets some, the South gets some, and along this 3630 line, slavery is not allowed above. And so, neither side was happy, but was this a fair compromise? Sure. And this compromise lasts for 34 years. When we finally get rid of this law in 1854, the Civil War starts 6 years later. 34 years. So when it's finally abolished in 1854, the Civil War starts in 1860. So does it give you an idea of how important this document was? It held us together for 34 years without any serious conflicts. But the Missouri Compromise, with this compromise, did it increase or decrease tensions? The compromise decreased tensions. It decreased tensions because now things were fair, things were equal. Now, Missouri becoming a state, that increased tensions, but this compromise decreased tensions. And for a good 34 years, right? Prevented war for 34 years. Not bad. Now, another issue that rises up with sectionalism is the annexation of Texas. Now, previously, we said the only reason why Jackson did not want to annex Texas was why? War with Mexico. But the other reason why Jackson was concerned about annexing Texas was that if we take on Texas as a new territory, what was going to eventually happen? This territory was going to become what? A slave state. And who was going to be upset about this? The North. And so he didn't annex it. But who did? Which president annexed Texas? President Polk. So when Polk annexes Texas, who's really happy about it? The South, because the South believes, oh my gosh, look at how many states we can make out of Texas. Because isn't Texas a huge state? They expected to make multiple states out of Texas. And so there was a belief that by annexing Texas, we could have a lot more slave states. And so this increased sectional tensions. The annexation of Texas increased sectional tensions. Good? Because the South wanted to make it slave states, in case that wasn't clear. The South wanted to make these slave states. Now, what else did Polk annex besides Texas? Oregon. He also annexed Oregon. Now, if you remember, folks, the North wanted to annex Oregon at what line? 5440. Or it was 5440 or fight, right? And we wanted all of this territory. But ultimately, what did we get? Only the 49th parallel. Now, why was the North upset about only getting half? Why did they want all of it? Because they could have made a lot more states, right? And so the North is upset, and they said, why all of Texas, but only half of Oregon? They thought it was a Southern conspiracy. They thought that the South was trying to steal Congress. So they said, why all of Texas, but only half of Oregon? That's not fair. Why did you only take half of Oregon, but all of Texas? There was an assumption that this was a Southern conspiracy. It was a Southern conspiracy to control Congress. So is this going to increase or decrease tensions? Increase sectional tensions as well. It's definitely going to increase sectional tensions as well. So you have that going on, and things are not going well. Things are getting a bit contentious in America. Good so far? So you get an increase of sectional tensions. Then, you have the Mexican-American War. If you remember, the Wilmo Proviso and the Spot Resolution was examples that the North believed the war was fought to do what? They only believed that the war was fought in order to be able to do what? Get California in order to do what? Yeah, the Northerners believed that the South started the war to do what? To spread slavery. So the North believed that the South started the war to spread slavery. And this became especially true when, after the war, what territory did we get from Mexico? What was that large piece of territory that they gave us? What do we call it? We got the Mexican Section. And so there was a belief that all of this the South saw as slavery land. Is that, oh, that's why we fought this war, so you could spread slavery. So is the North being very trusting of the South? Not at all. So what's happening to tensions here? Tensions going up or down? Going up. There was an accusation that the South was trying to spread this war. In fact, remember Spotty Lincoln? You wanted to know the exact spot of the war? I don't trust you, Pope. You're just trying to spread slavery. And Wilmo Proviso, what did that say? It's going to be on your test. Yeah, no slavery was allowed on this new land because what did the North believe? Yeah, the South was trying to spread slavery. So again, increasing tensions again. You have all this increase in tensions. So folks, we're going to continue this conversation about sectional struggles. Let's talk about the election of 1848. Well, you don't have to know these elections too much because these are presidents that you don't really have to know. So in the election of 1848, the important part is you should know that a third party emerges called the Free Soil Party. The third party emerges called the Free Soil Party. And this is an important political party. What the Free Soil Party stood for, folks, was that they wanted to prevent the expansion of slavery. The Free Soil Party wanted to prevent the expansion of slavery. They wanted to keep soil what? Free. They wanted to keep soil free. Free for who? They wanted to keep the soil free for who? The common man. This is not for slaves, folks. This is, they don't want slavery to expand to the West. But let me make clear, they are not an abolition party. They are not trying to abolish slavery. They say, if you want to keep slavery in the South, that's fine. But what don't they want slavery to do? To expand west. Because all that land in the West should be reserved for who? The common man. Because can I, as a common man, compete with the slave owner? No, they're going to make way more money and buy me out. So the argument is, this is an anti-expansion of slavery party. We don't want slavery expanding west because that land should be reserved for us, for the common man. Make sense? It's a pretty important third party you guys should know. Anyway, Zachary Taylor becomes president, serving from 1848 to 1850. What happened? He died in 1850. Zachary Taylor dies in 1850, probably by cherries. Yeah, like cherries. Zachary Taylor, 1848, not because he was allergic. It's a weird story, folks. We did an autopsy to see if he was poisoned, but he wasn't poisoned. At least we, as far as we could tell, he wasn't poisoned. But what happened was that he was really thirsty one day, and he just ate like a lot of cherries, like lots and lots of cherries, and he kept on drinking milk, just like tons of milk and tons of cherries. And for whatever reason, he ate way too much, and he got really sick, and his stomach couldn't handle it, and he died. He just ate a bunch of cherries. It was really hot in the summer, so he ate a bunch of cherries and milk. His stomach couldn't handle it, and for some reason he died. He's kind of an old guy too, but still, that's death by cherries, possibly. We don't know. Yeah, but it wasn't. It wasn't his heart that died out. He just died, probably from cherries.
Or maybe he choked on the
He didn't choke. He just died. Like, he was on his deathbed and he was dying. We're like, what's killing you? We assumed it was a poison. But it might be his body just couldn't break down all the food in time. Or he had like a chemical shock to one form of chemical in the cherries and the milk or another. Or his body just couldn't handle it anymore or what. But the man died probably from cherries. He was married. Anyway, he's replaced by the 13th president, Millard Fillmore, serving from 1850 to 1852. At which point you guys are asking yourselves, there was a President Fillmore? Yeah, there was.
I even know there's President Taylor.
Yeah, but you didn't even know there was President Taylor either. No. There was a President Taylor? There was. There's a President Fillmore? Yeah. There's also another president you're going to learn about real quick that you didn't know about. But anyway, President Fillmore is president. And that's going to bring us to our next PowerPoint. Whoop. No. Not yet. We're moving on. It's just a separate PowerPoint. So President Fillmore is president, and he's going to deal with the admission of California.
So this goes in again?
This is just, continuing our notes. I just placed it under a different PowerPoint in case one of them got corrupted. I had the PowerPoint divided into 2 lectures. Here's what happened, folks, when California seeks admission. Well, folks, when did we get California, folks? When did we get the territory of California? After the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right? After the treaty with Mexico. And so, in 1849, we find gold, and you see the beginning of the California gold rush. And people start rushing to California. In fact, 80,000 people moved to California very quickly in hopes of finding what? Gold, yes, sir.
Did you say that's why they call them the 49ers?
That's why they called them the 49ers, because they came in 1849. So the 49ers were the nicknames of the gold miners at this time coming to America. They're the 49ers. And 80,000 come to America in that time. Now, the problem is all these people are coming in, and is California a state yet? Which means, what doesn't it have yet? There's no laws or government. Shh, gentlemen, quiet down, please. So because there's no laws, California ends up becoming lawless. It's like the Wild West. Rape, murder, robbery, crime, stealing. I mean, it is pandemonium and chaotic in California because people are claim jumping each other and stealing from each other and killing each other for all this gold. Does California want it to remain that way? No, so the only way to bring law and order to California is to make California what?
state.
A state, correct. So what ends up happening is California applies to be a state. But not just any state. California applies to become a free state. Now, is this a problem? Who thinks this is a big problem? The South says, whoa, wait a minute. California can't be a free state. Look, the 3630 line, right? The Missouri Compromise. The South protested saying that California becoming a free state would be a violation of what compromise? They said it was a violation of the Missouri Compromise. Because what did the Missouri Compromise say? That states below had to become slave states, right? Wrong. That is not what it said. Because what the Missouri Compromise said was no slaves above. But did it say you had to be slave below? No, it did not. Which is what it said. And so it was a technicality, but they said actually they're not violating the Missouri Compromise because what the Missouri Compromise said is no slavery above. It never said you had to have slavery below. And so on a technicality, California requested admission. Now, many Southerners were very upset. Many Southerners threatened secession because that's what they do. And is this going to tear the country apart? Very much so. California's admission, increase or decrease tensions? Increase tensions by quite a bit. Sectional tensions going up. Do we have to solve this crisis? Yes, because it's going to become a serious problem. So here's how we solve it. The Compromise of 1850. In the Compromise of 1850, here's what we agree to. Number one, we agree that California will become a free state. No, we're okay with that. We'll let California become a free state. Two, not only will California become a free state, but the rest of the Mexican cession, the Utah and New Mexico territory, will decide the issue of slavery. They will decide the issue of slavery through popular sovereignty. They will decide the issue of slavery through something called popular sovereignty. What popular sovereignty means, folks, when I say that Utah and New Mexico will decide the issue of slavery through popular sovereignty, is that the people within that territory will decide. The people within the territory would vote. So, because popular just means what, folks? What does the word popular just means? It's like population, popular. What does it mean? No. The word popular just means what? It just means people. Like population is a people count. Popular just means a lot of people. Popular just means people. Now, sovereignty means what? Pretty much the answer to the question is like, who rules? Who rules? And so popular sovereignty means what? The people rule. The people rule. So when we're debating about this issue of slavery, should it be decided by Congress? No, they say who should decide? The people where? In people living in those territories, correct. So they said, all right, that's what we'll do. We'll make it based on popular sovereignty, and we'll make California a free state. But that's not all. The third part of the Compromise of 1850 said that they would ban slavery in Washington, D.C. Now, why would they want to ban slavery in Washington, D.C.? It's the capital, and are a lot of people from other countries visiting America in the capital? And what don't we want them to see? Slaves. We want to be a beacon on a hill, right? We want to be a shining example. We can't be that if there are slaves being auctioned off and walking around in the heart of our country. So we said we want to ban slavery in the Washington, D.C. You can have slavery everywhere else, but not in our capital. So they agreed to that as well. But the fourth thing that they agreed to was a new fugitive slave law. And this proved to be the most controversial of the Compromise of 1850, this new fugitive slave law. It proved to be the most controversial of all the laws, or all the new elements of this law. It was the most controversial, this new fugitive slave law. Yes?
What do you mean by controversial?
Controversial means it had the most tension, the most problems that people had with it. It was the most controversial. Think like the issue of, is there a lot of controversy or debate about, I don't know, whether or not pizza is delicious? I think most people would agree that pizza is delicious to some degree or another. What about abortion?
Oh, no.
Is abortion very controversial? Yes, that's what I mean by controversial. Two different sides. A lot of people are willing to fight over it. The new fugitive slave law was the most controversial, created the most problems. Now, here's why it was the most controversial, folks, because the original fugitive slave law said what? What did the original fugitive slave law say?
It says that any slave that escapes maybe would do that.
Yeah, we have to return all runaway slaves, right? That's what's required of them. But did the North follow that?
No.
No. Shh. The new fugitive slave law made stricter fines and punishments for helping slaves. There were stricter fines and punishments for helping slaves. In fact, folks, if you were caught this time trying to help a slave, they would fine you $1,000. In today's terms, folks, that's about $28,000 for helping a slave run away. They would fine you $28,000, and you can be in prison for up to 6 months. In today's time, folks, that's about 6 months. Because time doesn't change. Time's been the same for about a couple 100,000 years now. But yeah, no, $1,000, about $28,000. That's quite a bit. Pretty much the North, or the South, was hoping that they could require the North to obey. But here's why it's controversial. The North hated the new fugitive slave law. The North hated this new fugitive slave law. They hated it with a passion. And the reason why they hated the new fugitive slave law was because they felt as if slavery was being forced on them. They felt that slavery was being forced on the North. Again, they hated the new fugitive slave law because they felt that slavery was being forced on them. I don't support slavery, but am I going to be forced to return slaves? Yeah, and that's not fair. I don't even support the fact that he has to go back to slavery, but if I don't support him, I'm going to be fined $28,000? That's not okay. So the North hated it. They hated these laws. In fact, folks, they called it the Bloodhound Law. They called it the Bloodhound Law. Why? Why the Bloodhound Law? Because what did they use? They used bloodhounds to chase the slaves down. They called it the Bloodhound Law. And the North said, no, we won't obey it. We refuse. But it made them angrier because it was forcing them to follow slavery customs. Yes?
What if the slave was getting away and someone brought him back? Would they kill the slave?
No, they would return the slave. Again, they wouldn't kill slaves because that was a really bad investment. You want your slave back to work. Now, if you were really rich, you would return the slave and kill him as an example. But for the most part, you return the slave, you chain him up better, and you make sure that he works. Because if I spent $18,000 on a car and you stole it, and the car went along with you for some reason, because it's a car, would I get mad at the car and be like, oh, you car, you ran away, I'm going to destroy you now, even though you're my only car? No. I would take the slave back, I would force it to work. I might sell it. That might be another option too. But that's usually how that worked. So the North hated this new fugitive slave law. But the South, how did they feel about it?
They liked it.
Actually, they hated it too. Here's why. The South also hated the fugitive slave law. Not so much the law itself, but the South hated the Northern reaction to the law. The South hated the Northern reaction to the law. Because what they realized is that the North would never respect Southern slavery. What they realized was that the North would never respect Southern slavery. Because think about it, folks. If you were a Southerner, okay, I've given you California. We let you have popular sovereignty because you're probably going to win New Mexico anyway. We let you ban slavery and D.C. as well. All we're asking for is you return our slaves, and you're not going to do that? You're not even going to do that? Well, then what's the point of being in the same country if we're not going to help each other when things go wrong? And so the South was upset because the North refused to recognize their slavery rights. And all of a sudden the South started to think, what's the point of even being part of this country if that entire North won't even recognize our rights? And so the South was also upset. So, the Compromise of 1850, increase or decrease tensions?
Increase.
Increase tensions dramatically. Especially because of what? What of this increased the most tension? The new fugitive slave law. Be aware. In the election of 1852, You then have the next president, President Franklin Pierce, serving from 52 to 56. There's a President Pierce? Yeah, there is. I bet you didn't know that. President Pierce, serving from 52 to 56. Good there? Okay, he's just a placeholder. But the 14th President of the United States, President Franklin Pierce, serving from 52 to 56. That's all you have to know about him. He's just a placeholder president. Oops. So this brings us to Southern expansionist goals and attempts at a Latin American slave empire. Let's write that down. So, the Southerners want to expand slavery. Can they expand north? Because they're stopped by that 3630 line, right? So they can't expand north, so what's the only direction that they can expand?
West and east.
South. They're going to expand further south. And they're going to expand into where? Latin America. So because the Southerners can't expand north anymore because of 3630, and they're pretty much all the way across the U.S. already, the only place for them to go is further south. And the hope is that they'll establish a Southern empire in Latin America. Everyone good? Ready? So, a few people. First off, William Walker. William Walker was an individual that tried to spread slavery into Latin America. The first place he tried to conquer was Baja California, but he failed. He was defeated by what country? Mexico. Mexico drove him out. So, William Walker tried to expand slavery into Baja California, but failed. And then, he tried to expand slavery in Nicaragua in 1856. In Nicaragua. And in Nicaragua, he actually succeeds. He takes over the country. He makes himself a president. He establishes slavery. And he hopes one day that the U.S. will what? The U.S. will annex Nicaragua and make it part of the United States. Well, what ends up happening, though, is that William Walker is defeated by a coalition of Central American countries. A bunch of Central American countries decide, yeah, no, we're not going to let that happen. And they defeat William Walker, and then they execute him by firing squad in 1860. So, yeah. He tries to take over Nicaragua. He holds on to it for about 2 years. He's then defeated by Central American countries who are not okay with him taking over Nicaragua. And then they defeat him, and then they shoot him by firing squad in 1860. So that happened with William Walker. The story ended there. Good with William Walker? Awesome. The other guy you should know? Or not the other guy. The other country you should know is Cuba. 2 things that happened. Number 1, the filibusteros, or the pirates. The Southerners tried to take Cuba by force and failed. That was the filibusteros. They sent a bunch of ships down to Cuba and tried to take it over, but that failed. So, again, they sent a bunch of filibusteros into Cuba and tried to take it by force, but failed. That's the first attempt by the filibusteros to take Cuba by force. Again, that failed. The second attempt was known as the Ostend Manifesto. It was a secret Southern plot. The Ostend Manifesto was a secret Southern plot, a secret Southern plan. to start a war with Spain, it was a secret southern plot to start a war with Spain in order to what? If we start a war with Spain, what do we hope to gain? Cuba. So it was a secret southern plot to start a war with Spain to win Cuba. It was actually a really stupid plan, by the way. We never got around to it, but it was a dumb plan. The plan was, you don't have to know this part, but the plan was we would offer to buy Cuba for $120. And when Spain refused, we'd be like, well, no, how would you say no to that offer? You are violating the Monroe Doctrine. We should declare war on you. And then that was how they hoped to declare war on Spain. The North found out about it and they're like, that's stupid. We are not going to go to war with you. We'll go to war for that reason. And so the plan failed. But again, you should just know the Ostend Manifesto was about trying to win Cuba or steal Cuba from Spain. Yes. This brings us to the Gadsden Purchase. So, here's what you need to know about the Gadsden Purchase. Pretty much, the United States wanted to build a transcontinental railroad across the country to California. Does that make sense so far? They want to build a transcontinental railroad connecting the East and the West, pretty much connecting California to the rest of the country. Because remember, folks, there's really nothing in the middle yet. It's just really the East and then California. And so they had to build a transcontinental railroad. The problem is, if they'll build the railroad across here, just all the way across, what's the problem? What's going to get in their way? What's going to get in their way, folks? That's why I have the map here. The mountains. Which mountains? The Rocky Mountains are going to get in the way. So again, America wants to build a transcontinental railroad to connect the East and the West, to connect the East to California. The problem, though, is that these Rocky Mountains are in the way. But if you look closely, where could you build a railroad? Below the Rocky Mountains, right? The problem is we don't own this territory yet. That's Mexico's. And so what we do is in 1852, the U.S. sends James Gadsden to purchase the Gadsden Purchase, the small piece of territory, for $10 million. We buy that small strip of territory. The U.S. sends James Gadsden to buy the Gadsden Purchase for $10 million. 2/3 of what we paid for California. But James Gadsden is sent to buy the Gadsden Purchase for $10 million. And the whole purpose, again, was to build what? A transcontinental railroad that did not have to go through the Rocky Mountains. Questions there? Make sense so far? By the way, who's really happy about the construction of this transcontinental railroad? The South. The South is really happy about the construction of this transcontinental railroad because who is now closer connected to California? The South is. And the hope is, over time, if the South is better connected to California, what could we do in the future? We could move more and more Southerners to California and eventually make California what? A slave state. So the hope was that because we're connected by the Transcontinental Railroad, we might be able to make California a slave state. So make sure you guys understand that. The South is really happy about this Transcontinental Railroad because it created an opportunity for the South to make California a slave state. Good there? Okay. Let me show you a quick video then. Every so often, folks, again, like you've seen, there are different pop culture references to history. Anyway, so we have the Gadsden Purchase, and that purchase was made. So, while the South is building a transcontinental railroad, is the North happy about it? No, so the North decides that they want to build a transcontinental railroad too. So what happens, quiet down, is in 1854, Stephen Douglas proposes the construction of a northern transcontinental railroad. Stephen Douglas proposes the creation of a northern transcontinental railroad. Now, when creating this northern transcontinental railroad, the problem is that this railroad starting in Illinois has to pass through here, and then go to San Francisco. But if you notice, it has to pass through Kansas and Nebraska. Are Kansas and Nebraska states? No, they're territories, which means just like California before, what might be a problem?
Decision of slave state.
Well, they might be like chaotic, whatever else. And so he says, in order for us to build this railroad, Kansas and Nebraska, they have to become what first? States. So he wants Kansas and Nebraska to become states. But who's not okay with that? Why is the South not okay with Kansas and Nebraska becoming states? Because they're going to be free states in the North. So the South says, no, we're not going to let it happen. So Stephen Douglas, who really wants to build this railroad, says, okay, fine. Here's what we'll do. Instead, what we're going to go ahead and do with the Kansas and Nebraska Act is we're going to go ahead and repeal the Missouri Compromise. We're going to go ahead and just get rid of the Missouri Compromise. We're going to go ahead and eliminate that law, eliminate that line, and now we're going to go ahead and let Kansas and Nebraska decide the slavery issue based on what? What's that term we just learned? Popular sovereignty. So again, it repealed the Missouri Compromise and said both Kansas and Nebraska could decide the issue of slavery based on popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty. Now, who's really happy about this? The South. Why is the South really happy about this? Because what can now happen that could not have happened before? You can have slaves in the North. Who's really upset about this? The North. The North felt betrayed. They called Stephen Douglas a traitor and said, you can't do that. We said for years that slavery is in the South and free is in the North, and you ruined it for everyone. Is it any surprise that 6 years after this, the Civil War begins? No. Getting rid of the Missouri Compromise was a terrible problem. It was a terrible decision. And by doing so, slavery was going to begin in 6 years' time. Make sense to everyone, though? Kansas-Nebraska Act. Increase or decrease tensions? Increase tensions. And the North is pissed. But here's the thing, folks. If these territories are now based on popular sovereignty, what is the North and South going to want to do for Kansas? If it's based on popular sovereignty, what are people going to now want to do? Expand, yes, but they're going to want to move to Kansas. Why?
So they can spread
So that they can spread slavery from the South, or Northerners can come in and vote against slavery. Does that make sense, folks? Now people have to move into Kansas because now they have to vote. And so, folks, the other thing you should know, though, is that because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, you see the rise of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party is significant because this party is a combination of anti-slavery Democrats, the Free Soil Party, and the conscious Whigs. Whigs that are listening to their conscience. And this party, unlike the Free Soil Party, is not only an anti-expansion party. This is a party that believes in what? It's not just anti-expansion anymore. This is a party that believes in what? Abolition. This is an abolition party. Make sense? It's an abolition party. So the conscious Whigs, the anti-slavery Democrats, the Free Soil Party, they all form this Republican Party that is an abolition party. Not just a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not just an anti-expansion party anymore. It's a anti-slavery party. Or abolition party. Good? This brings us to Bleeding Kansas. Blood will be shed, as you can see right here. And the massive fire happening in the background. Here's what's going on, folks. Are a lot of Northerners going to move into Kansas?
Yeah.
Are a lot of Southerners going to move into Kansas? What's going to happen?
We split.
They're not going to split. Maybe they'll split each other's heads. They're going to fight. Yes.
So Kansas has good soil? Is that why-
Kansas has, but see, it's not even about soil. It's a great question. Does Kansas have good soil? Kansas has okay soil, but it's not about the soil anymore. It's about the slavery. It's about the politics. It's about maintaining that control in Congress. It's not about the soil anymore. It's about, are we going to keep slavery or not? And that's what it comes down to now. It's not about having plantations. It's about maintaining that control in Congress. And eventually, folks, if the southern states get enough states, couldn't they just make slavery legal throughout the country through a constitutional amendment? If they get enough new states and enough population, they can actually vote to have slavery forever. And so now the North and the South are fighting for these new states each time. Here's what happens. Many Southerners start moving into Kansas from Texas, Missouri especially, because it's right next door. And these Southerners are known as border ruffians, because they're coming just from the borders. Known as border ruffians. What's a ruffian? It's like a scoundrel. It's like a, you darn ruffians, always messing things up. It's like a problem kid. Problematic people. Troublemakers. They're ruffians. So these border ruffians were coming in from the slave states, moving into Kansas, and what were they going to hope to do? Why did they move to Kansas? What were they hoping to do? To influence and vote for slavery, right? Their goal was to vote for slavery. But is the North okay with this? No. So the North, they create several organizations called the New England Emigrant Aid Companies. The North creates the New England Emigrant Aid Company. And by the way, what does emigrant mean? To leave. So to immigrate means to go into. To emigrate means to send someone away. So what the New England Emigrant Aid Company did was that it raised money to do what with people from New England? To send them where? Where are we sending them? To Kansas. The idea is we're going to take people from New England and we're going to pay for them to move. Pay for them. What is happening? We're going to pay for them to move to Kansas. This is the North. They were going to raise money to pay for Northerners to move to Kansas in order to do what? So the Northerners could do what? So they could vote against slavery. Yes. Sure. And so these Northerners are voting to move. Sorry, not voting. They're moving to Kansas to vote for slavery. That's what's happening there. Now, the one thing you should also note is as the Northerners moved to Kansas, they brought with them Beecher's Bibles. They brought with them Beecher's Bibles. Now, Beecher's Bibles. What were they? First of all, they are named after who? Harriet Beecher Stowe that wrote what book? Uncle Tom's Cabin. So what were Beecher's Bibles? Huh? They weren't copies of Uncle Tom's Cabin. They weren't even books. They were rifles. So they brought Beecher's Bibles with them, which is really just a nickname for rifles. Because what did they expect to happen in Kansas? Violence. And so all these people are moving into Kansas. They expect violence to erupt. And violence does erupt. And so one really good example of violence, quiet down folks, is John Brown and the Potawatomi Massacre. John Brown was a Northerner who opposed slavery, and what he decided to do was to attack the pro-slavery town of Potawatomi and just massacre a whole bunch of pro-slavery Southerners. He did so by shooting a whole bunch of people, but he also stabbed a bunch of people with his 2 swords that he held in both hands and walking around the city stabbing people left and right. Yeah, it got really bloody really quickly. This violence escalated pretty quickly. So violence breaks out in Potawatomi after this Northerner starts attacking these Southern slave owners. Yes? Oklahoma. Most of them are in Oklahoma.
The population is dropping it.
Well, their population has dropped pretty drastically since already. They're all over the place. Again, not all of Kansas is part of the state yet, so they're all over the place in the Midwest. But anyway, and in addition, folks, you also see violence spreading off into Congress. Let me explain what happens here with the Sumner-Brooks incident. In the Sumner-Brooks incident, what happens is Charles Sumner, who's a Northerner, is attacked by Preston Brooks, who is a Southerner, in the middle of Congress during session. So Charles Sumner is attacked by Preston Brooks in Congress. Pretty much what you have to know, that's all you have to know, but here's kind of the background that's not going to be on your test. What happens is that Charles Sumner was denouncing the South for starting this civil war in Kansas. Because really, folks, you really argue that a mini civil war has broken out in Kansas. There's a mini civil war breaking out in Kansas. And Sumner is accusing the South, saying, it's your fault, you're horrible people, you did this. Well, Preston Brooks was so insulted that their honor was being besmirched, that their honor was being questioned, that he proceeded to walk over to Charles Sumner and he took his cane and he proceeded to beat Charles Sumner in the middle of Congress in front of everybody. He beat him so badly that his cane broke while beating Charles Sumner. He beat Charles Sumner so badly that Charles Sumner had to go to Europe for back surgery. Preston Brooks was kicked out of Congress, but all the Southern constituents that supported him began mailing him new canes, golden canes and diamond-encrusted canes, so he could beat other Northerners. They said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Finally, someone to stand up for Southern rights. Here's another cane. Go beat someone else up with it. That's what the Southerners wanted. It got so violent, though, that Northern congressmen and Southern congressmen were so nervous to go to work that they began to bring pistols and guns with them on the off chance that they ever got attacked. So now congressmen were coming to work armed with weapons because they didn't want to get caught off guard. And so, is this increasing tensions in America? Yes. Most definitely, yes. Charles Sumner was a Northerner, and Preston Brooks was a Southerner. And Charles Sumner accused the South of being responsible for bleeding Kansas. This brings us to the election of 1856. And in the election of 1856, as you can see, California's a state now. California voted. Yay. In the election of 1856, James Buchanan becomes the next president of the United States, serving from 1856 to 1860. There's a President Buchanan? There is President Buchanan. Serving from 1856 to 1860. Everyone ready? No? Almost? Okay. Well, in his tenure, there are a few Supreme Court cases you should know. The first is Dred Scott v. Sanford. Actually, the only Supreme Court case you need to know is Dred Scott v. Sanford. This is one of the most important Supreme Court cases you need to know in U.S. history. What Dred Scott v. Sanford said is the following. In the ruling of Dred Scott v. Sanford, the Supreme Court ruled that slaves were property. And I know that's been said before, but this is the Supreme Court saying it, which means what? This is the final say. Supreme Court rules that slaves are property. Secondly, individuals cannot be denied property rights. It also ruled that individuals cannot be denied their property rights. So individuals cannot be denied their property rights. 1, slaves are property. 2, individuals cannot be denied their property rights, which means slaves are property. Can I be denied my property? So which means if Massachusetts banned slavery and I want to bring my slaves there, can they ban me from bringing my slaves? No. And so what Dred Scott also did, number 3, is that it legalized slavery throughout the country. It legalized slavery throughout the country. Could states still say, oh, you can't have slaves here? Were you allowed to do that anymore? No. It legalized slavery throughout the country. You couldn't ban slaves anymore. And who was really upset about this? The North was really upset about this. Increase or decrease tensions? Increased tensions. Things are just getting worse and worse and worse. 3 years to the Civil War. Also happening in 1857 was the Panic of 1857. Hey, when was the last panic? 1837. Hey, wasn't that 20 years before? Interesting. 1857, since the last panic. What do you think caused this panic, folks? Over-speculation. How do you know that? Because it's always over-speculation. It's always over-speculation. But they over-speculate in different things. That's the one thing that does change. It's what they're over-speculating in. This time, what did they over-speculate in? Gold. Because, folks, did we find a lot of gold in California? Did we assume that gold would never end? Because there was so much. And did the gold end? Yeah. That was the problem. I said, oh, you spent $1 million and you made $5 million? And that was 2 years ago? I'm going to spend $10 million because I expect to make $50 million. So I spent $10 million on roads, workers, whatever else. And what do they not find? Gold. And so this was caused by over-speculation in gold. It was also caused by over-speculation in land, because are we buying land assuming that everyone's going to move west? Yes. And it's also an over-speculation in railroads, because do we have to move people there? And we assumed railroads were the best investment. So over-speculation in gold, land, and railroads. Now here's the important part. The North and the West, their economy suffered. The North and the West, their economies suffered a lot. Their economies were destroyed by this panic. So the Northern and Western economies suffered as a result of this panic. But you know who didn't suffer? The South. And why didn't the South suffer? Yeah, are they focusing on gold or land or railroads? No, all they grew was cotton, which meant to them, wait, you're telling me the entire country is suffering but we're not? What must possibly be the case? Cotton is king. Cotton must be king. How can it not be? And if we saw the entire country suffer and yet we didn't, the South also dangerously believed that they were invincible. And is that a dangerous notion to have? To think that you're invincible? Because do you think that you can handle anything? Maybe even secession or a war? That's not good, folks. If you're a young kid, you fall off your bike and you don't like bruises, like, oh my God, I must be invincible. Let's see what happens when I get hit by a car. Because you think you're invincible. The South was the same way. Massive economic panic and I'm untouched? I must be amazing. Let's see what else the South can achieve without the North. Maybe we can secede. Maybe we can fight wars. But the South had this overconfidence, and was that going to be their downfall? Yes. But this Panic of 1857 was a problem. This brings us to good old Abe Lincoln. How's his hair look on this day? So Abraham Lincoln, here he is. You don't have to know everything about Abraham Lincoln, just a few things. Number one, he was born poor. He was self-educated. He was born poor and self-educated. He was a wrestler and a weightlifter.
What?
Oh, Lincoln? Oh, yeah. He was a wrestler and a weightlifter.
He looks scrawny.
That's just because he's really tall. I mean, his body proportions are very weird, but he was a very, very buff guy. A lot of the reason why he was so strong was because he used to split logs for a living. Like, he was a log splitter for a while, and that's a lot of upper body strength, so he did become a wrestler for a while. His nickname was Honest Abe. He married Mary Todd. Marrytodd. He married Mary Todd. Yes?
Did you ever see that one commercial where it's like his wife? It's like, she goes, is this way to look bad or something?
Oh, like, I can't tell a lie.
Yeah.
Honest Abe. He was also a congressman. Do you guys remember when he was a congressman and people just made fun of him?
Yeah.
Spidey Lincoln. So that happened. He also became a lawyer. And he wore that stovepipe hat that you guys know very well. And he used to keep important documents in there. Oh, yeah. His hat was so big, he just put stuff in there. It's a stovepipe hat. There's top hats, and there's a stovepipe hat. His was taller than most standard hats. Eventually, folks, he does try to run for the Senate. He runs for Senate to represent Illinois. He runs for Senate in order to represent Illinois. And he runs against Stephen Douglas. And these are known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates. If you're in debate or speech and debate, if you guys ever do LD debates or Lincoln-Douglas debates or a specific kind of debate. Anyway, they hold debates throughout the country. Lincoln is known as the iron splitter or the rail splitter. And Stephen Douglas is known as the little giant. But in any case, folks, Lincoln loses. Lincoln loses to Stephen Douglas. And Lincoln loses primarily because of his anti-slavery views. He loses because of his very public anti-slavery views, whereas Stephen Douglas wins because of his moderate views on slavery. Pretty much, Stephen Douglas believes in... Not really. He's neutral. He's like, whatever. It's whatever you want. Because Stephen Douglas, he wants to be president one day. And if you want to be president of the entire country, are you allowed to piss off half the country? No. So he says, I have no opinion. That's up to the states to decide. So he's making the North feel happy and the South feel happy, whereas Lincoln was like, hey man, slavery's bad. You know, I may not try to abolish it as president, but slavery is not a good institution. And so it made him very unpopular. But it made him very unpopular to win this election. But Lincoln ends up becoming a favorite of the Republican Party. They're like, oh, did you hear that guy Lincoln speak? I like how he talk. And they decide to make Lincoln eventually one of the major leaders of the Republican Party. Yes. So, here's just some political cartoons of Lincoln and Stephen Douglas fighting. Another event you should know is John Brown's raid. You guys remember John Brown already? John Brown ended up going to Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Harper's Ferry, Virginia. And at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, John Brown tried to create or cause a slave rebellion. He tried to cause a slave rebellion. He killed like 10 people or 7 people. He killed 7 people, and he tried to get the slaves to rise up and rebel. The problem was no one told the slaves, and so it was kind of a pretty quick failure. I was like, all right, guys, today we're protesting, and you run outside protesting, but you forgot to tell everyone else, so you're the only one protesting. That's kind of what happened with John Brown. John Brown killed 7 people, but he was captured, and they hung him to death. They hung John Brown to death. The South said good riddance because the South saw John Brown as a murderer. They said that man deserves to die. He killed innocent Southerners. For what? A principle? Really? People deserve to die over that? He said no. No, they don't. But the Northerners saw John Brown differently. They didn't see John Brown as a murderer. They saw John Brown as a martyr. What's a martyr?
Someone who fights for what they believe.
Someone who dies for what they believe in. And they said John Brown died as a martyr. He died for what he believed in, and he is a hero. And who was upset about that idea? The South was like, wait, you're saying that guy is a hero? That guy murdered people. He killed tons of people left and right, and you're going to call him a hero? Yeah, but he killed people because he really believed in what, he was killing for. I'm like, yeah, that's not okay. That's not a good reason. Charles Manson believed in what he was doing when he murdered all those innocent people. That doesn't make him a martyr. That makes him still a murderer. And so they said, you can't call him a martyr. He's a murderer. What did this do with tensions? Increased tensions again. And so, folks, 1 year away from the Civil War. And things are getting very close. And so, this brings us to the election of 1860. In the election of 1860, folks, the Republicans nominate who? They nominate Lincoln. The Northern Democrats, you see the problem with the Democrats is they split the party. The Northern Democrats, they're going to nominate Douglas. The Southern Democrats, they're going to nominate Breckinridge. Breckinridge. And a new party called the Constitutional Union Party. Oh, we can't read any of that. The Constitutional Union Party. They're going to nominate a guy named Bell. So, Republicans are Lincoln, Northern Democrats Douglas, Southern Democrats Breckinridge. The Constitutional Union Party nominates Bell. Okay? Well, this was a very interesting election, folks, because even Lincoln wins this election 180 to a combined 123. Why did Lincoln win? Why do you think Lincoln won, folks? Huh? Not because of California. California only has 4 votes.
Because he was honest.
Not because he was honest. Why did Lincoln win? Look at the politics, folks. Why did Lincoln win?
Because all of them were just agreed to everything that they were saying.
No. It's because the Democratic Party was split. If the Democratic Party stayed a united party, might they have won this election? Possibly. But because the Democratic Party was split, Lincoln won the election. And here's even more important, folks. The significance of this election is that Lincoln wins, and he becomes the 16th president of the United States. But here's why this election is so important. Lincoln is a minority and sectional president. Here's what I mean. He's a minority and sectional president. And the reason why I say that, folks, is only 40% of the population voted for Lincoln. Only 40% voted for Lincoln, which means 60% of the country wanted someone else to be president. 60% did not want you to be president. And so is he going to be a very strong president?
No.
No. So he's our first minority president where 60% of the country wanted someone else to win. That's a big deal. The other thing is that he's a sectional president. And what that means is that only the North voted for him. No southern states voted for Lincoln. In fact, folks, 0 people in the South voted for Lincoln. 0. And here's how we know. The South was so worried about Lincoln winning the election, they didn't even put his name on the ballot. You couldn't even vote for Lincoln in this election if you lived in the South. So not a single person from the South voted for Lincoln. And this is the problem for the South. Not a single person from your region voted for the president, and he still won. What does that suggest about the South? They're not invincible, and they're certainly not what politically? They're not politically powerful. In fact, folks, no one voted for you here, and yet you still became president. What does that mean about your political voice? You don't really have any. And so why this election is also important is what it made the South realize is that they had no political voice left. That the North could always win the election if they wanted to, right? They don't need the South to win. And so the North had all the political power when it came to the presidency. The South had no political power anymore. And if you're in a country where you have no voice, what are you going to think to yourself? Yeah, why should I even be here anymore? And so what do you think is going to happen next? The South will secede. Because, folks, can you blame them? They voted, and not a single person voted for Lincoln, and he still won. And what are they worried about Lincoln doing now that he's president? They're afraid that he's going to abolish slavery. And so now, this becomes a problem. We're going to talk about this next week.